Where does candidate experience go now? Today in conversations ahead of the Introduce conference. Hey, I am Chris Wink. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Technically, the news organization with a community of technology professionals and entrepreneurs. We, ahead of our conference May 12th in Philadelphia called Introduce, we're having conversations on building better companies, about the big issues that are shaping and being shaped by the pandemic and the rest of the world at large. I'm super fortunate today to be talking with Kevin Grossman. He's the president of the Talent Board, the well-known candidate experience benchmark research organization. I promised I'd get all those words. I know the Talent Board well from their excellent research. Kevin, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate being here. Yes,
definitely. You guys are at the very heartbeat since your founding in 2011 on candidate experience research, how that's shifted and shaped. Yep. So let's start with candidate experience is a thing that many company builders know well, but just start with me. How do you guys define candidate experience? What's your working definition?
All the things. All the things. And what I mean by that is it's candidate experience. We always think of it as usually an active job seeker who is starting the process of research applying. But from our perspective, it's a 24/7 proposition, because at any given time, somebody who may not even be in the market at all may have had a bad day and then suddenly sees an ad for another organization that maybe they have a video promo of their culture and they're like, wow, that's interesting. I want to pursue that further. But it's really all the things that impact the perception of that organization, of the candidate itself, all the way through the process at the end of the day. So it's all the things that impact my decision-making, my perception of fairness, which is a subjective measurement, but it is something that we definitely look at, and how likely I am to apply again. Because again, let me be clear about this. Most candidates for any given job aren't getting the job. You just run the numbers.
Yeah, it's math. Yeah.
Most aren't going to get the job. It's always a small group out of every 100 candidates, maybe one or two or three, depending on what the volume of hiring is, they're going to get the job. So most don't get the job at the end of the day. So that experience that I have from beginning to end, most of the time when I'm getting rejected in that process, that will impact whether or not I decide to ever apply again to refer others. And if it's a consumer-based business, potentially impact my purchasing behavior as well. And just brand affinity in general. Am I going to be a brand champion or not, based on that experience that I have? So that's why it's all the things. And what's interesting that when companies always ask me and ask us at Talent Board, well, what about all the people process technologies that recruiting organizations are employing? And from a candidate perspective, unless I'm in the HR recruiting space, I don't care about any of that. All I care about is getting hired. And if I don't get hired, my perception of fairness may skew up or down, but all the things that you're doing as an employer, your people, your process, your technologies, impacts that experience holistically all the time, period. So it's all the things all the time that impact candidate experience, whether I'm conscious of it or not at the end of the day. And it does. And what we do know is that on the positive side, since the majority of the candidates in our research, 90+%, don't get hired, 30% of them are still likely, they tell us through the research, to refer others, to apply again, and to make purchases if it's a consumer-based business. So it is very possible, although it does skew negative still if I don't get the job. We find that there is a third that when it's a positive experience, they're willing to do stuff again.
Yeah, it taps into, I've always been interested in that employer brand marketing concept of you are telling a story to people who don't even realize they could work for you yet.
Correct.
In addition to people who may in the future. Yeah, that's well said. So Talent Board has been around since 2011. You guys do this benchmarking research on candidate experience. How have things changed in that decade plus, even before we got to the particularly chaotic last couple of years?
Well, I like to first answer this question this way. When that comes up, I feel like I'm this grumpy old man now standing on my porch telling people that it's the same things every year. Communication feedback loops make all the difference. Get off my lawn.
Mm-hmm.
But joking aside, there definitely are differences in trends that we've seen over the years, especially the past 2 years, which I can talk about in a sec. But for the most part, communication feedback are huge differentiators every single year in candidate experience. And
why don't because I've heard you say that. Why don't we change behaviors? Why do we still let those who apply never hear from us ever again?
And this is the part that it's kind of disheartening and frustrating, because another thing so if we reflect on the past year in particular, I know that there's many people in the recruiting and hiring and HR industry, individuals who by profession work in those industries, who have gone through their own existential crisis and have been looking for other roles and positions and jobs and wanting to be part of better cultures for them. And they are extremely disheartened by the experiences they're experiencing, that how dismal it is. And the fact of the matter is, it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, companies control any companies of hiring volume. There's a lot of automation that's involved, a lot of autoresponders. That's true, but we still control what we say, how we say it, when we say it, over time. And what most candidates really should be getting, and the point of application is where the majority of people end, right? It's only a much smaller group that ever gets screened, interviewed, assessed, made offers to, and obviously hired at the end of the day. So with the companies of any hiring volume, most of that point through the application is mostly automated. There's some human interaction in and out of that, but it's mostly automated. But you still control what you say and when you say it. And closure is the biggest deal. And unfortunately, too many companies aren't dispositioning, as the industry calls it, or rejecting, or saying thank you, but we're going to pass enough, and doing it in a timely fashion. If somebody is not qualified at the point of application, there are cultures where they'll hold on to individuals until they fill the position.
Right.
Then that could be months later, though, and then they may or may not let everybody know, thanks very much. But that completely has a negative reaction to it. We would argue within 5 to 10 days, if somebody's not qualified, they're not going to be qualified 2 or 3 or 4 weeks from now, most likely, for that role. Let them know and focus on the people who are. Let them know.
In the timeline that you guys, Talent Board, has been doing the research, let me trot out a perhaps controversial opinion, a soapbox of mine at least. I've written and done some interviewing around what I think of as like the dismal spiral of the one-click job apply universe we've created, because as best as I can understand it, in the years that 15 plus years of covering like tech and economic growth, and then therefore looking at the recruiting and hiring space from that lens, there's this like cycle of, I've seen this ever increasing advice from a lot of those big job platforms that are like, you actually should be applying for 5 jobs, actually 10 jobs, actually 15 jobs. So the number of jobs that they're recommending people apply go up. And so the volume that employers get, who are often not even qualified, because those platforms want to give you big numbers. I've gotten you 100 people who applied in 15 minutes. So then they have to create more interventions through technology, or, we're doing AI screening, which then introduces more bias, which makes it more in person. So then people imply more jobs. And I feel like we're in this spiral of we just don't need as many applicants. I think this thing is, we just don't need this many.
No, we don't need that many. I would agree with you. And there's always a percentage of what you would call serial appliers. So individuals that are applying for multiple jobs, dozens of jobs even,
right,
that they're just not qualified for. And unfortunately, that is a reality and that automation can't necessarily fix. You can try to have what they call knockout questions, trying to screen people out early on, getting people to screen themselves out early on. But there are those that just are trying to get through the process. But we would argue, and I'm talking, I know, in kind of generalities here, but most candidates, I would argue, that are interested in any given job really believe that they have something for that job, that they're somehow qualified somewhat enough for that job. Like, I'm going to put my hat in the ring for that, as the expression goes. And the reality is that this is where I think what we're calling artificially intelligent smart screening systems now that are have learning algorithms and natural language processing that are actually, for the first time, I would argue, getting better at identifying, even beyond, well, definitely beyond the human bias. Because the reality is, at the end of the day, we are smart organic beings, but we are also extremely prejudiced on certain levels, where we have our own unconscious bias that cannot be. And automation doesn't fully screen that out, but automation can learn to get better than a human is when it comes to that kind of decision making, especially for volume kind of reviews that go on. So there's a rub to this easy application process. Employers have tried to make it easier. That's great for the candidate experience to get in the door, but there's a lot left to be said for the candidates themselves when they're doing that, and then they get one ambiguous autoresponder that says, "Thank you very much, we'll be in touch if you're qualified," and they're never in touch.
Yeah.
And so there's still a lot of work to be done there, but I think a lot of the, again, smart technology screening that exists in our space now is getting better at filtering candidates and moving them along. There's still folks that are missed. I'm not even going to deny that whatsoever. And,
sure.
And in a world where we really have a bigger focus on, diversity and inclusion, and belonging, that automation can kind of backslap that at times. But I still think it's come a long way. And with that volume that you're talking about, which is part of the rub too, that humans can't deal with that kind of
for volume. Sure.
There has to be automation that's involved in that. But I hope, and I would continue to think that most candidates need to also try to self-assess and screen themselves out. And there are tools that, again, knock out questions during the early application process that, man, maybe this job isn't for me. I'm not gonna continue to submit. Lots of different kinds of assessments that are given as well that can help kind of zero in on that smaller group of people that I do want to talk to when the human interaction kicks in.
Right.
Unless it's a small hiring volume, it's really lots of automation. It's not unless I get screened, and then maybe a phone screen or an interview or online assessment where I'm getting then I'm getting potentially more human interaction, and that's when that kicks in. But that's always that smaller group of people that make it that far.
A way I think about it, I think that, like, traditional economic theory would say there actually should be only one applicant for every job. That there should be a maximally efficient market in which what employer and organization want is like perfectly met. It should be the only.
We're a long ways from that,
right? And so I think if I think I've seen this research that we know that for all of these many reasons, it's gotten easier and easier. Applicant volumes are going up, and I think there's always that there's bravado. You just want to tell your boss, like,
it depends on the job too.
Yeah,
or it depends on the job, because the harder to find, more technical roles, people in medical services. I mean, much more harder to find folks, because there are folks that the companies like, it takes a long time to find. They have to have retained search firms.
Right.
It's not people that are coming to apply at your jobs. And then you have a huge volume of people for a lot of, hourly positions, customer service, where there's much bigger volume. So when we talk, I was talking in absolutes, but there's definitely varying degrees of what we're talking about.
But even in technical, look, I picture, like, we covered technical roles, and yes, I will hear from employers of, it's a grind to hire, of course, particularly on in software engineering and the like of these very advanced skills. But some of them still have this challenge of, like, well, do I want to go in the big universe, and I might just get a lot, but I'll just get flooded by totally unqualified folks.
Yeah, and that's the reality.
That's just so I feel, but I do know that it certainly varies. I have limited time with you, so I have to push us forward. You guys just recently did some research that I thought was was interesting. Tell me a little bit about what candidate resentment looks like and why that's something you're paying attention to.
So every year we look at different kinds of ratings from candidates about their experience. And what we define as candidate resentment are the candidates who say, it was a horrible experience. I don't ever want to do anything with you again. Period. Now, we know how subjective a lot of what we measure can be.
Right.
At the end of the day. And at 1 minute, you could be extremely happy with the experience, and then somebody doesn't respond to you and it goes south quickly. And that's the reality, though, of recruiting and hiring, and not just with external candidates, with your own employees as well. Hence, one of the many reasons why we've seen a lot of employees like, I'm done here. I'm going over here now. But it's the resentment is that it was a horrible experience. I will never do anything with you again. I'm never, ever going to apply for another role. I'm never going to refer anybody else. I won't buy your stuff anymore if it's a consumer-based organization. I don't want to have any brand affinity. I'm done. And not everybody puts their money where their mouth is, but we know a significant percentage of those who say they won't don't continue to engage with that employer. And those are things that can definitely impact referrals, which is one thing that companies definitely depend on. They can make hires upwards of 20 to 40% of the hires could be referrals. And if they lose those, they lose that track, right? And then for consumer-based businesses, if I choose not to be a purchase your stuff anymore, that can be quite costly for the organization. It's not the same thing for B2B, but it's a little more complicated in the financial impact. But if I don't have the referrals that I depend on year after year, and companies definitely depend on that, that impacts my business over time. Financially, it can impact my business. And the cost of a vacancy being open, I mean, there's so many different equations that we could run that where to kind of shine a light on what that potential cost is. Doesn't mean it will happen, but we know we've worked with enough organizations over the 11 plus years that we've been doing this, that it's it can definitely hit. It can definitely hit the brand. It can hit the business itself on revenue and referrals. It's real. And
you're hitting at the overall point from throughout this conversation of why have you spent so much of your time focused on candidate experience, because it's this remarkable opportunity. You're not just hiring for this role now, you're hiring for roles later. And as you keep hitting home, you're hiring for brand affinity. It is this opportunity of, you have, dozens, hundreds, thousands of people who've expressed some interest in what you do. What an opportunity that is. So you've seen some uptick. My understanding is that something has changed around candidate resentment in these last tumultuous years.
So what we saw during the pandemic, we had gone from in 2019, and especially in North America and EMEA, not so much in the other regions, which is another conversation for another time, but resentment rise. So 14% of all the candidates said, I'm never going to do anything with these brands or businesses again. It dipped dramatically in 2020, in the first year of the pandemic, because organizations were frantically trying to figure out, what do we need to do? We had to virtualize everything, no more in person. There was a lot more empathetic communication that was continuous, because the world kept changing over and over again, as it still does today. And candidates were more forgiving in 2020. In 2021, that began to change again. And in North America and EMEA in particular, it began to rise to pre-COVID levels again. And so far this year, we're still capturing data for this year through August. Companies can participate too, confidentially and anonymously, for their candidates and themselves through August. But we're still seeing close to that 2019 resentment level that we saw. I'm wondering if it's going to go skew a little bit higher, but we'll see. I don't know yet. I mean, again, there's some subjectivity there too, right? But if I could have the best candidate experience, and at the point of not being hired at the end of the day, I completely can be resentful, even just based on that. Even if you were communicating well with me throughout the process and you gave me closure, that's unfortunately can happen. But most of the time it doesn't. If you acknowledge the candidate, communicate, and are consistent throughout, expectation setting, et cetera, and then give me closure if you're not going to pursue me any further.
Right.
Whether that's automated or personally, especially if I've made it farther in the process, I'm more likely to do stuff with you again. Our data says that every single year.
And that tracks other research I've seen on. We saw an uptick in candidates ghosting, which was typically only the employer ghosted the applicant.
Too, yeah.
We saw that. Okay, I'm gonna lose you here in a minute, so let me push to what you are. I don't want to oversell how much the world has to change in all ways due to the pandemic. I'm wondering if you do see any trend lines that you think have lasting shifts, or do you think will return primarily to where we were in 2019?
I'm not a soothsayer. I don't ever like to predict, but I do think though that for now it will continue to be a candidate market. Who knows how long? 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. There are a lot of economists are predicting, unfortunately, a downturn, recession, even deeper in the near future. I hope that's not the case. But that will turn at that point. I don't know how long it will last. I think at some point again, the employers still hold all the cards no matter what. Even for the most sought after candidates that you're looking for hard to fill positions, you as the employer still are the ones that are hiring. You're the ones that are offering the money, the salary, the benefits. Your experience will impact what they decide to do. And that's why I would one recommendation I would give to candidates anywhere, because we've seen candidate ghosting completely increase a lot. People just not even showing up again of their jobs. A lot of hourly work, but not just that, salary too. To candidates, I would recommend not to do that, because at some point it's going to shift again. And it won't be your market again. And I would just implore employers to engage, communicate, and give closure to all your candidates, period, in a timely fashion.
That is a Kevin Grossman mantra that I think we can go on.
Yes.
Kev, thanks so much for this conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Experience. Appreciate it. This has been our Next in Conversations ahead of the Introduce conference on May 12th. We'll see you there. And as always, I think somewhere next to my face now is a little box where you can click to go see additional introduced videos and all of Technically's reporting. We'll drop some links below to the Talent Board's work and recent research, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.